In this video, I'm going to show you how to configure a new instance of the PI interface for OPCDA. So we're back on our PI interface node, and currently we're at the point where we have installed the PI interface configuration utility and the PI interface for OPCDA. We've also verified the data on the OPC server using the PI OPC client tool. So before we create our new instance, we're going to want to make sure that security has been properly configured on the PI data archive. So we need to make sure that an identity has been created for PI interfaces connecting to the PI data archive, and that this identity has read access to the PI point table. We also need to make sure that trusts have been created for our specific instance of the PI interface for OPCDA. Finally, we need to make sure that the user running the PI ICU has administrative privileges on the PI data archive, and should have read-write access to the PI module databases, %OSI, and interfaces module. To see a full list of permissions required by the user running the PI ICU, go see the PI Data Archive Security Configuration Guide. So if you're missing any of these steps and you need some help, you can check out our Configure PI Data Archive Security playlist on our Learning channel. Alright, so now we're going to start by running the PI Interface Configuration Utility, or PI ICU. So first, let's make sure that we're connecting to the PI Data Archive using the proper credentials. So let's go to Interface and SDK Connections. And here I can see that I'm connecting to my PI Data Archive, and I can see that I'm connecting using my domain account, and I'm connecting as PI admins. So that's perfect, we are good to go. So finally, we can create a new instance of the PI interface for OPCDA. So we can use two buttons to do that. The first is the Create a New Interface Instance from Executable, which is this button here. Or we can use the Create a New Interface Instance from Batch File, which is this button here. So both options are valid. The second option is actually going to allow you to select an existing batch file, and you can just duplicate it into a new batch file. And even if you haven't created an instance yet, you can actually use the template, which is the OPCInt.bat_new file, which comes with the installation of the PI interface for OPCDA. And this is actually going to fill in some of the parameters instead of just leaving them blank. But I don't want to do that. I want to pick all my parameters myself, so I'm going to use the first option. So the first thing to do is browse to the interface executable. You should already get to the proper location, but if you didn't, please go under PyPC Interfaces and OPCInt. And then I'm going to check the PI data archive that I'm going to be sending data to. Okay, so next I need to select my point source and interface ID. And the combination of these two parameters is going to be my unique identifier on the PI data archive. So you want this combination to be unique for this interface. So if I had selected the Create a New Interface Instance from Batch File and selected the .bat_new file, I actually would have gotten a point source of OPC and an interface ID of 1 selected automatically. Now, an important point to keep in mind is that when your PI interface starts up, it's going to load all the points with the point source that matches its own. So let's say you configure a ton of interfaces with the same point source. Every time you start up one of those interfaces, it's going to load all of those points, and this might significantly slow it down when it's trying to start. So it's actually recommended to select a unique point source for every interface that you're creating. So I'm going to select the point source GBX, since my OPC server is a gray box simulator, and I'm going to select an interface ID of 1. You can also select here an interface name to display in the ICU, but I'm just going to leave this as default. So now you have to hit the Add button. So this is going to create a new PI interface batch file, and it's going to allow me to continue configuring the PI interface. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is create a scan class. So in the last video, we talked about the fact that when OPC clients get data from OPC servers, they request data in groups. So these scan classes are essentially those groups. So you need to press on this button to create a new scan class. And the first thing to select is a scan frequency. So this is going to be the rate at which the data is requested. So here I can select any scan frequency I want. We don't really have any specific recommendations for scan frequencies. It all depends on which OPC server you're using, what your network bandwidth is, how many points per scan class you're going to have. But essentially you want to make sure that you're not requesting too much data at too high of a frequency. So right now I'm just going to select a scan frequency of 10 seconds. So the format here is going to be hour, minute, minute, second, second. So this is how you would write 10 seconds. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my OPCInt tab, which is here. And it's going to ask me if I want to save, but since I don't have an OPC server selected yet, I'm going to hit no. Okay, so here is where I select my OPC server. And right now the OPC server name is localhost, so that means it's going to look for OPC servers that are installed locally. So if your OPC server is not local, you're going to want to replace this with the IP address or host name where your OPC server is located. And I want to make an important point here, and that is that if your OPC server is not local, you will have to configure DCOM security before your PI interface for OPC DA can get data from the OPC server. OPC clients and OPC servers use Microsoft's COM and DCOM communication models to communicate. COM specifies how applications on the same computer communicate, whereas DCOM specifies how applications on different computers communicate. And obviously this has pretty severe security implications. So by default, two applications can't communicate using DCOM, and specific permissions need to be given to the accounts that are going to be running the OPC server and OPC client. So if you have not configured DCOM and your OPC server is not local, you will have to do that first before configuring your PI interface for OPC DA. So my OPC server is local, so I can continue. So now I'm going to want to hit List Available Servers. And now I can go to the drop-down menu, and I can select My OPC Server. Now, if your OPC server didn't show up and it is installed locally, what you want to do is just write out the name of your OPC server in this field, and it should still work. And we've essentially configured everything that a PI interface for OPC DA needs in order to work properly. But I'm going to give you a few extra parameters that are a good idea to set, just as best practice. So the first one is going to be located under Data Handling. So here you're going to want to check the write status to tags on shutdown. This is going to make sure that interface shutdown is written to your tags whenever the PI interface for OPC DA is shut down. Next, you're going to want to go to the Untitled tab. And you're going to want to select the API connection name. And here you want to put a name OPCI. So if you remember, for our trusts, they were restricted with the application name OPCIE. So that's an API connection name that's truncated with an E at the end, with just 4 letters. So to make sure that our PI interface for OPC DA should always be able to use those trusts, we want to specify this API connection name. Finally, we're going to want to go to Disconnected Startup. And here we want to check Enable Disconnected Startup. So normally, when a PI interface starts, it needs to connect to the PI data archive before loading the points and starting to collect data for those points. So checking this is going to make sure that our PI interface is going to be able to start up and start collecting data even if it doesn't have a connection to our PI data archive. So that's pretty much everything. Now we just need to hit Apply. Okay, so now we have configured everything we need for the PI interface for OPC DA, including our best practices. Now what we're going to want to do is configure the Windows service that's going to be running our PI interface for OPC DA. So we want to go to the Services tab. So these are all the parameters of our Windows service, and we're going to want to leave most of these as default, but one thing that we could and probably should change is the account that's going to be running our service, and that is located here. So by default, the selection is local system, and this account should have all the proper permissions to reach our OPC server if it's local, and also access the system files that it needs. But it also gives the PI interface for OPC DA many more permissions that it doesn't actually need, and this isn't a very secure configuration. So it's actually recommended to change this to a custom account. However, I want to reiterate here that if you're using a custom account, you will have to configure DCOM security, whether or not this account is local or if it is a domain account, and whether or not your OPC server is local or remote. So if your OPC server is local, you can choose a local account or a domain account. Whereas if your OPC server is not local, you'll most likely need a domain account. And DCOM security is not the only permissions that you're going to need for this account. You also need to give this account write access on the PI PC folder and the right to execute the OPC Interface application. So I actually have a local account that has all these permissions, so I'm going to change it here. Again, if you do not have an account with all these proper permissions, you're going to need to do that first or use local system. Okay, so my account is a local account, so I'm going to use period as my domain, and my account name is OPC Interface. So I just need to put in the password. And I need to hit create to create the service. Alright, now we have everything configured and we are ready to start our PI interface for OPC DA. So first what we're going to want to do is start the message log, which is this button here. And that's going to make sure that when we start the interface, we see all the messages and confirm that our PI interface for OPC DA has been properly configured. And then we can press on the Start button here. So there's a few messages that we want to look out for here. First, we want to make sure that our interface was able to connect to the PI data archive. So we can see that message here. Next, we want to make sure that it was able to connect to the OPC server. So that should be located a little bit lower. And we can see it here. If your PI interface for OPC DA was not able to connect, you would see a message like can't connect to OPC server, and you might also get a reason, for example, access is denied. So most likely that means that DCOM security has not been configured, or that there's an issue with your OPC server. Finally, we want to see whether our PI interface for OPC DA detected any tags. So here we see that it's saying that the total number of points matching the point source is 0. So that's actually normal because we haven't actually configured any PI points on the PI data archive yet. The last thing we can check is whether our PI interface is connecting to our PI data archive properly. So for that, we're going to go back to PI SMT, and we're going to go check Network Manager Statistics. So if we go to the bottom, we can actually see that one of the last connections is from our OPC interface. And we can see that it is connecting using the trust, and it's connecting with the proper identity. Alright, so now we have properly configured our PI interface for OPC DA, and in the next video I'm going to show you how to create PI points for that PI interface.